once again. Welcome to Trillium Wells Plain Talk. I'm here, as always, with my partner, Matt Gomoll, and we try to talk about things that are timely and happening right now. And so, Matt, there are a couple things I think we want to touch on very, very quickly. Um, First, just let's spend a minute on the government shutdown. It's still going. And we said last time that that might be something. I don't know that there's any big things to be talking about, but it's still going on.
Yeah, it's still out there. Neither side has conceded enough yet. So it's still kind of hanging out there. President Trump did just pull a few levers to get troops paid, which was a good bargaining chip for Democrats, and so he kind of found a workaround for that. We'll see what the next thing that needs to happen to get some concessions. But yeah, I think maybe another week, 2 weeks. Hopefully, it doesn't drag out into November.
Well, last time in the Trump administration, there was a shutdown that lasted 35 days. So there's definitely some stick to itiveness, and he seems to have more power than he did last time, on these things. But as I keep saying, that he's a guy that he loves to be loved, and so I think even he'll only let it go on um, so long. I will say that the military pay thing you and I spoke about this week, it's kind of like I don't know who's pulling all the strings. It's kind of a brilliant maneuver, right? Like it's probably illegal and you're not supposed to do it, but who's going to politically stand up and say, I want to take you to court to not pay the troops. I don't know who's going to do that. It might be some smaller congressman or senator, but I don't think the powers that be are going to get in the middle of that fight. So it's pretty unique on pulling that off.
Yeah, it
Um,
was a new technique. Well, again, you're right. I don't know if
yeah,
it's Congress's job to appropriate money and to have the executive pull money from one place to another. Legality might be
yeah.
questionable, but they did it, and troops are going to get paid. So that should move things forward as far as like, okay, this is not an issue we're going to hold up. Let's move on to just opening the government.
All right, so another quick topic we want to talk about, because I don't think there's a ton of noise around this either yet, or I'd say like things that we can get to out of this. But the big kind of a surprise thing from China. Like I think everybody was really thrown off by this, thinking that the China-U.S. relationships were going on fine, and then kind of out of nowhere, we're going to withhold
Yeah.
rare earth minerals for you, and that's twofold. I mean, it certainly affects things like chip manufacturing, but as you know better than most, the effect of that on defense is pretty significant.
Yeah, it was one of those things where all of a sudden things escalated. Kind of last week, which the market responded to when Trump said he was going to retaliate with huge, I mean, like 100% tariffs. So that really escalated things into going into the weekend. Since then, it's pulled back a little bit where he's made some statements saying we don't really want to derail this relationship and we don't want to throw each of our countries into disarray. So the markets responded positively to that, and so we're kind of back on a better track. But yeah, there's been this tit for tat between both sides. They both have leverage. China has rare earth minerals. Absolutely, those are critical to defense. I just saw something about the Department of Defense trying to buy a stockpile of, I don't know which metal it was, but they need this stuff. And they're like, okay, well, we're just going to get our hands on it and put it in a warehouse and use it, give it to our suppliers who need to build the F-35 and the whatever other things, because it's used in all these different high tech pieces of equipment. The US has tariffs. We have access to our market. We have our US dollar. We have a lot of things that we also use. So we're at a point where we each have leverage. Hopefully they calm things down, get to a point of talking. Apparently they're supposed to meet later this month at a conference in South Korea. So hopefully that's some progress, and maybe you'll see another delay of tariffs, right? So there's all these different dates of tariffs are supposed to start here or there. Hopefully, as President Trump is negotiating and sees that they're making progress, some of those November tariffs won't turn on.
Yeah, I'm not totally surprised. I think, from a logic standpoint, it's a little bit of a response as, the Chinese are known for looking at things in much longer pictures. They don't have elections. So they think that a 25-year plan is a short plan. A 100-year plan is an appropriate plan. Here in the U.S., we turn over our legislature every 2 years, and so we've kind of gotten into 2-year plans.
Mhm.
But I think after some pragmatism, they're probably sitting there saying, "We understand that you want to, lower your reliance on China. We're not happy about you eliminating it, and we need to do stuff that, they're pretty smart on knowing there's other places where rare earth minerals can come from. The Ukraine, right? That's part of the deal that Trump signed there. So I'm not totally surprised.
Yeah, it's not like China's the only place on earth who has these things. Their unique position is they really committed to, number 1, dig them out of the ground, which is very dirty, and number
Mhm.
2, process them, which is also really dirty. So, there are rare earths in Ukraine, there's rare earths in all over Africa, there's rare earths out west and in Alaska. So,
And in
we have them
Arkansas, I
too.
heard
Yeah, so, like,
there's some
they're
big
out
big
there.
deposits there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so messy, right? So for a long time, the US policy has just been, we'll let you do that in your country. We don't wanna take the climate, not necessarily even climate, but just like uh ecosystem hit to having a giant mine digging stuff out of the ground in Arkansas. It's messy. And so digging them out, processing them, it's just a dirty business. So to the extent we could import that, make that somebody else's problem way overseas, and we'll just import the product, great. We win. Well, the problem is when we no longer control that supply, we're starting to realize the downside, right? There is a downside to being reliant on other people for these materials, and they're just a huge bargaining chip with any country who wants to negotiate with us. They're a critical item, and until that gets into material science and physical things of like how do we actually produce this battery with different materials because we don't have enough lithium or whatever, right? That it's a whole different realm, which I do expect advances to make progress on, but still, right where we're at today, we are relying on the thing, we've invented certain technologies and they're relying on certain materials, and those are coming from certain suppliers.
So Matt, we'll probably get back on those topics again over the next few weeks as they show themselves a little bit more, and I'm sure they will. I mean, there's certainly two things that, well, hopefully the government shutdown could go away any day. We don't know about that, but the rare earth thing is I think a long term thing that we need to look at. But how about, what we talked about last time is we did take viewer feedback and there were questions on GDP. And so I know that you're prepared to talk a little bit about that today. So give us kind of the insights on the questions that was asked or were asked from our one of our clients.
Yeah, so I think the question came up because there was a pretty sizable revision to GDP, and it was from 3.3% up to 3.8%. And you say, wow, that sounds like a big number. Um, this is, in any government statistics, we see this happen. There are revisions to the jobs data, revisions to the economic growth, all these things, and it just has to do with more data became clear, and we got better information a month or two after it was released, right? So you put out what you have the first month of the quarter, for example, and then by the second month of the quarter, you get updated data points from looking backwards, obviously. And you just say, oh, you know, we missed that part. It didn't come in yet. Now we've got it. Now we're going to revise it upwards or downwards. So in the case of, yeah, we revised GDP up from 3.3 to 3.8. That was a big number. So kind of putting this thing in context, GDP Q1 was negative. It was negative zero point 0.6. A lot of that, and I'll get into a little bit of the mechanics of how GDP is calculated. We had a ton of imports. We've already talked about this before.
Mhm.
everybody was importing in Q1 to front run the tariffs. They were like, okay, Trump just got in office. Something's going to happen. We're going to import just so much stuff so that we beat the tariff deadline and we can get it in there cheap. And then, retailers are stocking up. Everybody's stocking up. Well, that turned into a detractor of GDP based on the way that the number is calculated. So that was down. And then Q3 or Q2, sorry, was 3.3, moved up to 3.8. So all this stuff, it's kind of like, what does it all mean? We just see these year over year growth numbers, and that's kind of, generally it's, what is GDP grown from Q2 last year to through Q2 this year is kind of what we're doing with this stuff. So the GDP, it's trying to calculate like what all was produced, goods and services within our borders this year, right? And that's why imports are excluded. We don't something that was produced overseas and then shipped here, we don't want to necessarily calculate as something that we produced. So it has a couple components. There's consumption by households, right? I go buy something at Best Buy or Walmart or Amazon. That is me consuming. There's investments, so businesses uh, stocking up on inventories, capital investment into their business, government consumption and investment, and then the last part is exports minus imports. So you can see if we're taking exports minus imports and whatever that net number is, we're adding it to these other numbers. That's where you get a huge impact from lot more imports than exports. We're going to have a detractor on that number. It'll draw against the GDP calculation a little bit. So that's kind of how we look at the big picture of what's all put into the calculation, and it spits out a number that is just the total number. That I think today our GDP is last year was 29 trillion. I think today it's up to 30 trillion. And so, yeah, $30.48 trillion. That's the GDP number in nominal terms. And then what we care about is that change, right? That change. What it was it last year at this time? What is it this year? Do a calculation on the percent change is basically what's going on there.
I think there's a danger to it, right? And I think what people forget when, and you just gave a great explanation, but it is why, like, it's so big now. And historically, what would move things, and that's the problem with sometimes just looking at historical data. So people are like, 2% isn't that big. Well, on the size of our economy, it's massive. And
Hmm.
getting close to 4% is absolutely massive, right? And so we set expectations. And again, we make decisions based on numbers. It's why, Matt, you work with me every day. I hate calendar years and I hate calendar quarters because they're arbitrary, right? And we're making decisions based on bad data. And we may be making decisions on times forgetting that our economy is so big that the days of, there were some times I think back in the Reagan era where they had these like 7% quarters, right? That would be almost ridiculous right now to do that. Our economy, I don't know what it was, but I bet it was a third of the size it is now, even during that time, 40 years ago. So it's meaningful. And 3.3 to 3.8 is a gigantic number.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
was.
like you said, on a $30 trillion economy, it's absolutely massive.
Yeah, it is. One of the things, so I think part of the question that we received also was, are there going to be changes to the GDP calculation? Like, there has been talk from the Trump administration about trying to exclude the government number, right? So the government number, you could spend a whole bunch more money, make GDP look better, take credit for that, and then say, wow, look at the strong economy we have. And in reality, you're just spending a bunch of extra government dollars on debt. So that's not happening yet. So government numbers are still included, but it just kind of gets to the point that it is part of it. Government spending can be not necessarily going towards productive things, right? Not every dollar the government spend is going towards like building infrastructure that is going to help grow the economy. Some of it's not very productive spending that they do. And so to the extent that that juices the GDP number a little bit, yeah, that's a factor. I would say, yeah, during this government shutdown, do we expect GDP like to be a little lower? Yeah, the government's literally not spending some money right now. So if we looked at this quarter's GDP, it's probably going to be a little low. Uh, will it be made up for the next time when the government reopens? Yeah, probably, right? Like the government will just speed up the spending that they didn't do in October. So it all kind of balances out. But it's, that's a factor. What the government does, I do feel like we're getting into an era where we need to maybe curb government spending just because we have so much debt. So will that be a drag on the government's contribution to GDP? Yeah, it might. Right now, I think the number was it represents 17% of our GDP number. Will that come down in the future? Yeah, maybe. I mean, it'd be very reasonable that it does.
I think there were some moves, made on before the so-called big beautiful bill, on tax laws and all in the last Trump administration, and we're missing something now. As a guy that went to college in the '80s and took economics classes back then, there's what's called the GNP versus the GDP, and the gross national product takes on things that are just made by Americans anywhere in the world or made by American companies anywhere in the world.
Right.
And when those tax laws changed and those big companies started repatriating dollars back to the US, because the tax laws were out of control, the corporate tax laws. So what you had is a lot of countries making money in other countries and leaving it in that other country. I
Hmm.
think a lot of what we're seeing right now, Matt, where we've continued to have this economy that doesn't seem to be slowing down. Even when you see the news, oh, it's slowing down, doesn't seem to be. I fly a lot, and airports are packed, and things seem to be going very well out there. I think that change also has a bigger effect on our economy than it was for a number of years. Where now we're producing or making money in these other countries, and the big boys and big girls, the Apples and the Microsofts and the many different companies out there are bringing that money back to the country. So it is having an effect here. And if people are wondering, when Apple says to President Trump, we're going to build more stuff here, they have more money now that they're willing to bring back. So I think we're going to see some great byproducts. And what typically happens, and we forget, and it's worse now. We're really a slave to whatever we're seeing on TV now. It's a huge economy, and these things still move slower than people think. And the effects of things that happened even 6 years ago on tax laws start to have an effect now. They didn't necessarily have the effect back then, right? Because they were still bonusing people the right way. They were still doing certain things, but the money they have to come back here and spend, the money they have on things like research and development. I saw Larry Fink from BlackRock speaking today, and these are things we forget about. Like, everybody's talking about the AI boom and the lack of jobs and what'll happen then, but it's a long way till we get there. You and I have talked about the power it takes, the computer power, the just electrical power. Trillions of dollars of expenditures have to happen in the United States for these things to work. Trillions of dollars have to spend happen in other countries too. But at the end of the day, we don't have robots, walking around building data centers yet. And that's a long way off. So there's a lot of good things on the horizon. And you and I've talked before. I just don't see, you know, I don't want to, jinx us or think about like what could go wrong, but I'm looking at a lot of things right now, and there's too many things that make me say I can see some temporary slowdowns. I can see like
Hmm.
weeding the garden, so to speak, and a 15% quick pullback in the market that rebounds very quickly. But with all the things that are going on right now, and things like that AI revolution that everybody's afraid of, it's also going to create, at least for the next decade. I don't know what happens after that, but for the next decade, some just ridiculous opportunities for things that does expand the GDP. By the way, when we start
Yeah.
building things here.
Yep. Yeah. And there's kind of two things that come to mind with what you're saying. So one is we're entering an era where companies around the world have gotten to as efficient as possible supply chains. which means you have as few factories as possible to produce just the number of things that you need. There's not a lot of excess capacity. What we realized starting with COVID of saying, wow, our we can't even get the materials we need from China. We can't get, medicines, or we can't get protective equipment or whatever it was, because there's not a trade war, just like a literal shutdown of ports and shipping. So to me, it hasn't fully played out yet. It did, some of the stimulus, or not necessarily stimulus, but the spending bills that under Biden were to say, yeah, I'll give you credit. We want to invest in onshoring stuff. So that was already underway with the Infrastructure Act. It's going to continue. We're going to see more spending because people realize that the most efficient supply chain possible isn't necessarily a secure supply chain. And so, just on that basis alone, we should have more spending, more production in the US or right near us. The second part is, yeah, the AI. What comes of AI? What comes of all this technological innovation that's occurring right now? I was actually listening to a podcast with Kathy Wood. So she's a very famous investor, runs several investment funds, very bullish on innovation, right? So she's on the kind of extreme end of I believe in innovation and
I
where it's
think
going to
one of
go.
her funds is named like the innovation fund. Yeah,
It is an
she's pretty
innovation
big
fund.
on
Yes,
it. Yeah,
yes, she's very
exactly.
big on it. What she was saying, she was looking back at GDP. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. GDP prior to electricity was about 0.6% per year, right? So she was like, yeah, 400 years of economic data, about 0.6% growth every single year, slow. Then electricity happened. And in the following 125 years since then, we've had about 3% GDP growth. So she looked at it and she said, okay, this major technological change took us 5x from zero point 0.6 to 3% GDP growth per year. That's massive. What is it? And so she looked forward, and this is a very, aggressive stance, but she said it's not unreasonable if we were to hit 7% GDP growth in the coming years due to, she said, robotics, energy storage, which is batteries, and AI. And she was like, hey, that's only doubling, roughly doubling our GDP growth instead of 5x, which I just told you about under electricity's change. Um, who knows? 7%, maybe that's too aggressive. The point still stands. There are several things going on right now technologically that are going to lead to increased productivity, which are going to expand our GDP. Um, Important to remember, when electricity is invented and it started to get adopted in factories, it wasn't until the factory redid itself, reorganized itself around electricity that you saw productivity gains. Before that, you'd have all these little stations with belt run, machines or whatever. And if you just tried to electrify that machine, you didn't get much productivity growth. But when you realize, oh, I can build this whole thing, like scrap the whole design and start from, I have electricity for every stage of this. That's where we got that mass production. Henry Ford inventing the
Assembly line.
systems he
Yeah.
built with car production. That's so I kind of feel like we're right there where we're starting to use AI. We're kind of adopting these things. It's not had major productivity growth where we're seeing it. The younger generation who's internalized this stuff and makes it part of their daily life, they're more productive than a 40 or 50-year-old trying to implement AI in their life. And frankly, businesses look more like a 40 or a 50-year-old running it. So that's why you aren't getting the productivity yet. Give it a couple years and we're going to see it take off.
Yeah, and I think, this topic will rear up with us again without a doubt.
Hmm.
But look, there's I'm going to point out some significant positives, right? So production is just that. And we have an aging workforce. Like I'm in the smallest generation as a Gen X guy, right? This is the smallest generation. And what happens is we've worried about what we're producing, and it's a double-edged sword, right? You we're worried about population growth using the planet's resources, but you need population growth for productivity. And what I would say, that look, this could be nirvana, or a utopia a utopian existence that may not exist, but most of the world doesn't look like the United States today, meaning all of the comforts that we have, right? All of the things that we consume. So there's a lot more that could be consumed right now worldwide as these things happen. And we could be a leader in that. And when I look, Matt, in our own firm, we're using AI in a lot of different ways. And we're looking at AI on a lot of different, things that we're doing now. What will that be in the future? And, my position and your position and the position of our partners is, not to eliminate jobs, but to be more productive with the people that we have and to be able to reward them more. Right. So I'm hoping that the people much more powerful than us realize, boy, if you had control of everything, but nobody has any money, you have nothing. Right. Like nobody's going to buy it. And I think if people are smart and they look at it like we are on a microcosm of going, but if we can use this technology, we can do more. It's hard to even source good employees now, right? It's hard to source expertise. So now we could do more. We can reward more. We can do a better job for clients. And I think that's something. I know a lot of people are afraid of AI. I think I'm going to, for a little while, probably be beating the drum on, it's okay to think about all things that can go wrong, but maybe we want to think about the things that can go right because there's a lot more room for productivity. Again, the United States, you've been way more places than I have, but even, places that are developed. I mean, Canada doesn't even look like us on the stuff that we have and the stuff that we do. Japan, who's very developed, their cities are very high tech, but their rural areas, make ours look rich.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of space out there to do things. So, Matt, final thoughts from you today?
Yeah, I think, we're still in a good position. The AI is still the story behind the stock market. It hasn't filtered down fully into the economy yet, so we haven't gotten the full economic gains of that, and I think it's still gonna take some time, but for now, things are on a okay footing, pending a trade war, right? Like, 2 weeks
Mm.
from now, we can talk again, and we might be in a full-blown trade war, or we might be hugging it out with China. I have no clue where this thing's gonna go, and so we just kinda gotta pay attention. There's gonna be, I'd say, a lot of noise. Anybody's tweet or interview in the administration can move the markets in the near term, but the long term, it is all about earnings growth, profitability, all those things.
I love it. And I'll tell you, my final thought is we didn't talk about it. It doesn't necessarily affect things here, but really great news out of the Middle East this week. And that honestly, that gives us a lot of, for, pardon the pun, but currency with the rest of the world right now. And it
Yep.
does even put people like China on notice that the rest of the world is looking at the United States. At least in this, it's almost a throwback to that beacon on the hill, right? That we are striving for peace. We're doing so many things. So happy for all of our, all the United States citizens that were affected by that, and all the people in the Middle East. Matt, any ideas? I don't have any, but are there any ideas on what we might talk about next time, or we're just going to wait to see what happens in the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think, like I said, next 2 weeks, government shutdown, China, trade talks, those are the 2 big ones. We also did have some other questions that we can reference, and, we don't necessarily need to talk about right now, but AI is certain we certainly can go deep on. We've covered, a little bit of it today, but we can go a little bit deeper as well of what it means in the economy and the markets.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt. I tell everybody again, like you'll see an email address at the bottom. Certainly feel free to send any ideas, the things you want us to talk about there, or talk to your advisor or any team member at Trillium. We meet, the whole team meets every week. So if we hear from somebody that wants to hear something out there, we want to stay timely and deliver, information that our clients want. So thanks, Matt.
Thanks. Good talk.